Good morning, everybody. Today I'm going to be doing a workshop about Particle's Wallet as a Service, specifically in the context of building consumer-facing applications and refining UX with things like social logins and account abstraction. We're super excited to be part of the Viction Horizon Hackathon and can't wait to see what you guys build. So before we jump into it, I figured I'd start with a quick introduction. So my name is Ethan. I go by the alias online Tabasco, and I do developer relations here at Particle Network. I'm currently out in Istanbul for DevConnect, so I apologize for the mic quality. But I'm super excited today to be talking about this and kind of diving into the world of consumer-facing UX through the means of Wallet as a Service. Okay, so first to start, I want to kind of define Wallet as a Service. Some of you may be familiar with this term already, and some of you may not be. But in general, the best way that I find to describe Wallet as a Service is sort of a technology that enables things like embedded a wallet experience that is native and crafted specifically for your application. Social logins, so onboarding to an application and specifically onboarding to that embedded wallet using your Google account, email, Twitter, etc., along with various other technologies like account abstraction. In short, Wallet as a Service is sort of an alternative to the traditional wallet experience where you download an extension and generate a seed phrase, write it down, and so on. Because those, while they're great, aren't super practical for actually onboarding non-technical people or people that maybe aren't quite enthusiast level with Web3. So by using Wallet as a Service, it provides a very simple and familiar path for people to onboard and use your application. And it all feels quite natural. As like I mentioned, it's embedded and customized and so on to make sense and be a seamless integration within your dApp. So as you can see with Particle's Wallet as a Service specifically here with these kind of graphics that I have in the background, we basically provide social logins through something that we call Particle Auth. This is our method of facilitating account creation through a mechanism that we call MVC TSS. It just stands for Multi-Party Computation Threshold Signature Scheme, which in short is a key management mechanism that enables us to do social logins in the first place. It also allows for things like enhanced security, further account flexibility, and so on. Additionally, we have our own in-house Connect modal called Particle Connect. This is a little bit like Rainbow Kit, but designed to function specifically with Wallet as a Service social logins at its center while retaining compatibility with Web3 native solutions like MetaMask, Wallet Connect, and so on. We use a combination of technologies to achieve this. Like I mentioned, MVC TSS. We're also natively compatible with ERC 437 account abstraction, which I'll talk more about later, along with a variety of other things like a trust execution environment for our sort of key circulation system and so on. Additionally, the big part about this that we believe is probably most important is an all-in-one developer flow. So all the technologies and sort of onboarding paths that I just mentioned should ideally be packaged into one or two libraries that make it very easy to get started, ideally in less than 100 lines of code. So that's basically what we built here. We prioritize developer experience, but also while retaining core developer flexibility, which means modularizing features, being able to deeply customize the user interface or even craft your own user interface on top of the account that we generate. We have various different API endpoints. Of course, the SDKs themselves are super straightforward, as we'll see later. And this isn't anything super new. We've already had a significant amount of applications integrate Particle and use that as one of their primary or alternative onboarding mechanisms, such as Apex Pro, Xtereo, Multiverse, ETHSign, and so on. Additionally, what I'd like to highlight here is a sort of visual example of what actual utilization of Wallet as a Service looks like. So this is actually Apex Pro, an application that's natively integrated Particle, and it's quite simple, as you can see. Essentially, I'm onboarding through my social logins. We'll have the GIF repeat here in a second, so you'll be able to see it again. But I onboard, it takes just a few clicks, and I have a full embedded wallet. In this case, they've queried that through a Manage Wallet button, as you can see there. I am logging in with Google, my Google with that, and then I have my account open. That was it. It was basically 2 clicks, and now I have a full account on Apex that I can use, deposit, do trades with, and so on. And then, of course, we also have our own wallet interface that you can also use to manage that wallet, as is shown in the GIF here. So a little bit of a basic example, but Apex is a pretty long-standing partner of ours that leverages Particle as a core option in their onboarding flow. So in this case, a maybe less Web3 native person can essentially go to Apex and start using it in 2 clicks with accounts that they already have. So it reduces a lot of core complexity that is fundamentally present in most cases when using Web3. Okay, so now that we've defined Wallet as a Service, as this sort of alternative onboarding path, an embedded wallet powered by social logins, using something like, in our case, MVC TSS to secure the wallets, along with a variety of APIs and SDKs to interact with this and enable sort of a crafting of the onboarding and utilization experience in your application, I now want to introduce something that I think some of you might find quite interesting, especially for building on Viction. And this is Smart Wallet as a Service. Now, some of you may already be able to kind of imagine what this looks like if you're familiar with things like smart accounts and account abstraction. But if not, let's quickly run through what Smart Wallet as a Service actually is. So typically with Wallet as a Service, as a user onboards with their Google account or their email and so on, what they get is an externally owned account. So a traditional sort of rigid account that, while it's more flexible with MPC TSS, meaning you can implement things like master passwords and payment passwords, and of course, facilitate that social login onboarding in the first place, EOAs are still fundamentally limited and quite inflexible. So the alternative instead is to still generate an EOA, but instead of ending there, continuing this process and actually assigning a smart account to that EOA and having that smart account be the mechanism of interaction with a given application that a user has. Rather than ending at the EOA, using that for interaction, we continue onto a smart account and use that instead. So basically the flow here, you log in with your social account, an EOA is generated, of course, in this case, secured by MPC TSS. We assign any smart account implementation, economy, CyberConnect, simple account, zero dev, open fort, etc. And through that native assignment, and of course reflection in our user interface and SDKs, we can natively leverage ERC 437 account abstraction completely through Particle. So a user can onboard and have a smart account in 2 clicks. And then you can, of course, do things like sponsor their gas fees, you can batch transactions, implement usage of session keys. The sky's the limit. Right? So in the same onboarding flow and virtually the same amount of complexity on the actual developer side, instead of onboarding to a rigid structure, you're onboarding to a almost infinitely flexible structure, which means that you can further refine the user experience of your application in a significantly larger capacity than you could with EOAs. So we're going to jump from that sort of simple graphic to a more complicated one. If you're familiar with actual utilization and interaction with ERC 437 account abstraction, then this flow might look a little bit familiar to you. So of course, in this case, for key management, we're using Particle Network. This is Particle Auth, like I mentioned before, through social login and so on, which we're then assigning to a smart account, just meaning the EOA is the signer for that smart account. We're of course implementing paymasters. This is all integrated into an application through the means of an embedded wallet, because of course this is through wallet as a service. So you can do things like pay for gas using any ERC20 token, do batch transactions, swapping and bridging, and all of this is actually within our native wallet interface. But you don't even have to use that. You can just go straight from the social login to the smart account to the application, which then leads to, of course, the construction of a user operation, which can either be handled manually or through one of our SDKs. And then, of course, you can send this user operation to a bundler, which natively you use the particle bundler that we have integrated within the SDKs, or you could use your own bundler implementation like Biconomy, Pimlico, StackUp, Alchemy, etc. And of course, the user operation is sent off and the transaction is complete. So it's quite simple. Essentially, at the core of this is modularity. So what we really want to enable is utilization and implementation of account abstraction through the means of wallet as a service for social logins and security, while being as neutral as possible within the larger infrastructural landscape. So like I mentioned, that means using any smart account, implementing a paymaster of your own if you'd like, a bundler, etc. Or of course, you can stick with our native implementation. It's all up to you, and it's quite a spectrum of different types of apps you can do. But at the end of the day, what this enables is highly flexible onboarding and utilization logic within your application. So like I mentioned, to kind of reiterate on that modularity piece, this is a graphic that we made for one of our articles not too long ago that essentially shows you with our native implementation, which means usage of our SDK directly. You have Particle for the bundler, Biconomy for the paymaster, a few different types of smart account implementations, of which we're adding more quite soon. And then, of course, you're using Particle, the EOA generated from the WAAS as a service, as the signer. Now, if you'd like to use external infrastructure for the same flow, of course, the signer still remains as Particle Network, but you can implement things like Alchemy, StackUp, Biconomy, etc. for the bundler, same thing for the paymaster, and of course, same thing for the smart account. So this is another visualization of using the smart wallet as a service. As you can see, it's pretty much the exact same onboarding flow, although the difference here is, as you can see within the UI, we have this sort of smart account indication. If I send a transaction, I can choose the fees. That's an optional pop-up, of course, from the developer side, and I can choose my different smart account implementation, CyberConnect, Biconomy, simple account, and more coming soon. And this is all within practically the same amount of code, only basically one or two more variables that you need to declare within your code to actually make this happen. So the same product, same simple onboarding flow and flexible implementation, but now natively compatible with account abstraction. So this means implementing AA into your application quite easily, and of course powered by WAAS as a service. So like I mentioned, the actual added programmatic complexity, so how difficult or easy it is to integrate this into your application or build an application around this, is quite minimal, meaning it really only takes a few lines of code to actually get a full demo up and running. In this case, in this GIF, I'm kind of scrolling through a demo that I created, and we have a few of these for a variety of different chains, including one for Viction. And as you can see, this is going to be the same flow for virtually every chain, including Viction, of course. And in this case, it's a full demo created in under 90 lines of code. I'll be covering more on the Viction demo specifically in one moment. And of course, Particle Network is actually free to use forever. Previously, we used a SaaS model based upon monthly active users, but quite recently, we migrated from a software as a service model to a token-centric economy. So soon we're going to be releasing a token, and we have some new technology, things like intent architecture, omni-chain account abstraction, zero-knowledge wallet as a service, and so on. We have a lot coming out soon, most of which will be powered by a token that we're going to be launching also quite soon, which means that we're shifting from a paid model to a free-to-use model for developers. So what I want to do here before we wrap it up is quickly head over to the demo for Viction that we have and dive into kind of what that looks like architecturally and actually show you the demo in action. Okay, so we're now on Replit, which is what I typically use for making these demos and so on. As you can see, we have the entire demo here in basically 93 lines of code. It's a little bit more than the demo that I showed in the GIF a moment ago because I added some logos and stuff like that to make it look nicer. But as you can see, it's actually a very simple implementation flow. So we're simply defining a config to start. This includes some key variables from the particle dashboard. We're defining our particle network master variable here, which is basically our representation and in some cases our method of interacting with particles wallet as a service. We're creating the smart account object in which we're basically defining what type of smart account we want to use and on which chain, in this case on Viction. We're defining a custom provider for ethers, which means that we'll be able to send user operations just as we would typical transactions within ethers because we're using a custom provider object that we're passing in our smart account object into. We're changing the actual optional wallet pop-up interface that I showed you earlier to represent the fact that we want to be on Viction with a simple account representation. And of course, we have our main app component right here where we're just fetching the balance. So getting the balance of the smart account that we have, handling the actual social login, and then the authentication type that we want. And then of course, retrieving the user information from this. So name, email, and so on. We're then executing a sample user operation. In this case, it's just 0.001 Vic to a dead address. As you can see, it's super simple. We're just retrieving the signer, constructing the transaction, and sending the transaction. Then we package all of this in our JSX here, which is just simply mapping these different functions to buttons, throwing in some nice CSS and logos, and that's it. So very simple. We have a fully fledged demo right here in under 100 lines of code. If you remove the logos and all that stuff, then it's actually under 90 lines. You can find this same demo on GitHub under particle-fiction-demo at Tabasco ATW, which is where I host all the demos that I create. So as you can see here, this is what the demo actually looks like. Very simple. I basically set this to either be signing in with Google or signing in with Twitter, although we have a very large number of options to use here from Facebook, LinkedIn, email, phone, etc. So I'm gonna go ahead and sign with Google. And as you can see here, I'm now signed in with my Google account called Proxy. I have the wallet pop-up right here. Pretty simple. We can check the NFTs, the activity, different tools like sending tokens in a batch, same thing with NFTs. And of course here we have the execute user operation button. I don't have any Vic in this account, but I can click it anyways. And as you can see here, we have our sign message button. I can click on continue, although it's not going to go through, of course, because I don't have any Vic in my account to burn. But that's how this demo looks. It's quite simple. I went from a state of not being logged in to going through my Google account, being logged into a full smart account, and then executing user operation. And keep in mind, this is all in 93 lines. And of course, like I was showcasing earlier, this is our official web demo, web-demo.particle.network, where you can go and test everything out. In this case, I can switch to Viction right there. And of course, I'm using my simple account. So I can open this up. As you can see, I'm on Viction, this account. Similar to the actual demo that we just looked at, I can send Vic, send ERC20 tokens, and so on. Of course, this actual UI is customizable. You can either customize it in sort of a deep sense within the particle dashboard, or there's customizations that you can do within the code itself. So like changing the authentication theme between light and dark, the language, the fiat coin used to represent different values, the theme of the wallet itself. So we're on light mode right now, as you can see. We can, for example, switch to dark mode, and we have that right here. The border radius, whether or not we prompt for master passwords when somebody logs in, security settings, and so on. And of course, we even have a native on-ramp, so you can click on something like this. And if you'd like to use our built-in on-ramp to facilitate the purchasing of cryptocurrency, then you can do that. And we actually aggregate a number of on-ramps like Transact, Alchemy Pay, FatPay, etc. We have a number of other features like, of course, Particle Connect, like I mentioned, native compatibility with things like Rainbow Kit, so on. And all this packaged together, essentially the goal here is to facilitate onboarding experience that feels natural and familiar for both Web3 users and Web2 users. So if you're building a consumer-facing application, then considering the integration of wallet as a service is a must. It's how you facilitate social login, and in this case, how you cultivate a very refined and intentional user experience using account abstraction. And this is all natively available for free on Viction mainnet and testnet. Now, in addition to all this, we'll also soon be releasing a number of like I mentioned earlier, new technologies such as zero-knowledge wallet as a service for confidential login and transactions, as well as things like omni-chain account abstraction and our intent fusion protocol for generalized intent-centric design. These new technologies that we're working on are quite complex, and these topics run pretty deep. The great thing is, though, that all of this that I just mentioned will be directly compatible with Viction, so you can learn more about these different technologies at blog.particle.network, where we have articles on WAAS, which is, like I mentioned, our method for confidential login and transactions. Of course, we have our announcement for our smart wallet as a service integration with Viction, some deep dives into omnichain account abstraction, and so on. Although purely for the wallet as a service side, which is kind of our flagship base product at the moment that we just talked about over the last 15 minutes or so, I'd also like to quickly showcase our dashboard, which is at the moment our main way of facilitating interaction across our entire tech stack. Now, by facilitating interaction, I primarily mean configuring, retrieving API endpoints, stuff like that, for the different components of our tech stack. So this is primarily wallet service. As you can see, for that side of things, we have specific applications that correspond to certain instances of wallet service. We can view activity, so I can even see how many active users I'm getting daily within this project, as well as the number of total users. I can assign multiple team members to work on this dashboard with me, so they can see all the same information, spin up applications and such. Then the really cool thing here is that within that onboarding flow that I just mentioned, and the examples that I gave you through our web demo, as well as the demo that I made for Viction, something that you might have noticed that there's this common authentication menu that seems to pop. This is what I talked about briefly earlier in the introduction, which is particle auth, our main method of facilitating onboarding and login with Particle's wallet as a service. Now, the great thing about Particle Auth is that it's entirely customizable. So within this menu here, of course, I can change the colors. So I can change the background color to bright red if I wanted to, or, make it darker or lighter. Even the text colors, secondary text colors, the accent color, and so on. It's super customizable and even extends to border radius. You can see for these buttons here, we can make them more rounded or kind of more straight edge there. You can change the logo from the Particle logo to your own logo. Change the text from, of course, the project name to the button for setting the code for the actual confirmation button. And this level of customization extends even further down to the verification menu, the transaction pop-up. So we can do the same color change, text change within the transaction pop-up right there. And then additionally, we can change the email and SMS verification. So you can change the logo on the email verification, as well as the name for both the email verification and the SMS, if you want to change that to the name of your specific application. Additionally, I can click on users here. I won't do that right now because that'll display information about users on my demos, but essentially that'll give you information like, the kind of authentication, social information from those logins, so name, email, and so on. Although with the introduction of WAAS soon, we're changing this landscape a little bit and taking more of a stance towards privacy and reducing the amount of social profile information available through social logins. Now, another big point that I like to emphasize here is that within your application, within the social login flow, you don't need to use our existing social login methods. You don't need to use Google, Twitter, email, etc. through Particle Auth, because within Particle Auth, you can configure your own custom authentication method using GWTs. So, for example, if you want to create your own user registration flow within your application, then you can actually tie that registration flow directly to Particle Auth and generate an account. Or if you want your own, for whatever reason, Google authentication flow, you can do the same thing. You can completely customize the entire onboarding flow if you don't want to use our existing predefined authentication methods with custom authentication using JWTs. Additionally, we have a few sort of secondary services, such as our Particle nodes. These are quite simple and essentially just power a lot of our own applications. Additionally, for users on your wallet as a service, you can do things like asset locking for specific contracts that you own. We have a whole NFT marketplace service, IPFS, and like we talked about briefly earlier, a native on-ramp which aggregates multiple different providers. Now, a lot of this over the next few months, including our landing page as well as the dashboard itself, will be changing quite soon as we release things like our WAAS and our intent fusion protocol. But at the core of all of this is, like I mentioned, a tech stack built around enhancing user experience and enabling you to build an application that feels natural for consumers to utilize. And the result of this is, of course, the ability to integrate that type of accessibility and onboarding in a way that requires extremely minimal actual engineering time. For example, we've seen full-fledged applications get large-scale integrations up and running in just a few days. Whether you're using Rainbow Kit, Particle Connect, or Particle Auth like we do in this demo, adding Particle into the mix is super easy. Like I mentioned, Rainbow Kit is a good example of this. This is a pre-existing connection modal. So many applications already use this as their primary method of facilitating wallet connection. And as you can see, natively within Rainbow Kit, we have Google, Facebook, Apple, and of course a more generalized Particle option. And adding this into a pre-existing Rainbow Kit implementation takes truly less than 5 lines of code. Viction is a great option when when you're building your application. And we're really excited to support both Viction mainnet and testnet, like I mentioned, natively on Particle. As we continue to release new services, Viction, along with the other large variety of chains, both EVM and non-EVM like Solana, will continue to be at the center of that, meaning that you can expect continual evolution of the technological capabilities of our tech stack. So we know that many of you are building more consumer adjacent applications, like of course there's a gaming track, payments, social, and so on. And these applications are perfect cases for implementing social logins, utilizing an embedded wallet through wallet as a service, and of course, if you like, integrating account abstraction natively through the means of wallet as a service. This can be the make or break of ensuring that your application is widely accessible and feels familiar to end users, whether they have been in Web3 for 3 years or whether your application is their first chance at trying Web. You want to make sure that that impression is good and that you don't lose them, which is why leveraging wallet as a service, particularly smart wallet as a service, because of that intrinsic flexibility and that accessibility is so important. So like I mentioned, my name is Ethan, although I go by the alias Tabasco online. You can find me on Twitter at TabascoWeb3. My GitHub is TabascoATW. You can also follow us on Twitter at Particle Network or scan the QR code on screen, as well as visit our website, particle.network, or also scan the QR code. Again, thank you so much to the Viction team for giving us the opportunity to do this talk within the Viction Horizon Hackathon. Super excited. You guys are killing it to see all the applications that are going to be coming out of this hackathon. I can't wait. I think you guys are going to build some super cool things. And I hope that many of those things are leveraging Particle as an option for onboarding. If you do end up using Particle, feel free to shoot us a DM on Twitter or go ahead and send me personally a DM at TabascoWeb3 on Twitter. And we'd love to chat and figure out how we can further support you, retweet your project, and so on. Keep an eye out for a video coming from us over the next 2 or 3 weeks. It provides a more deeper dive about 10 to 15 minutes of live coding for replicating the demo that I just showed you briefly today. This, in addition to various other things, will make for a solid suite of content for building with Particle on Viction. So again, excited to see what you all build. Thank you guys for having us.